Now recognizing the member from Prince George Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak. It's been a long week for all of us already, but here we are. And today has been a hard day, a stressful day for Canadians. It's been a hard time in general in this country. And economic uncertainty isn't just felt in the boardrooms of companies on the TSX. It's felt at the kitchen tables of families trying to make financial decisions about their future. Do they know if they're going to have a job the next day? Should they purchase a home? Can they afford to put their kids in T-ball this time? As legislators, it's our duty to address this uncertainty and try to help British Columbians during a time of crisis. So we've been debating Bill 7 today, and we just heard from the Minister of Energy. And this is a bill that the government decided to drop right before we left back to our ridings on a couple of weeks of break. It was cynical to drop that bomb and think that was a way to avoid scrutiny of this bill. And what a bomb it was. And the Minister of Energy, in the course of the debate, talked about how he admired other premiers across this country. He mentioned, listed off all the premiers that had been working on the same file as part of Team Canada. Well, I can tell you that no other premiers are trying to bring in a bill like Bill 7. BC is not admired in this country right now. No one is trying to achieve this level of power grab. We also heard from the Minister of Energy about energy sovereignty and Team Canada as part of that. This is the same member that brought the Kinder Surprise and tried to, in the 2013 election, we heard from him that he was going to surprise everyone and oppose Kinder Morgan like that. We also have members opposite who said that they would use every tool in the toolbox to stop that pipeline. Well, that is about energy sovereignty for Canada, where we can export and diversify our markets. That's not Team Canada. And as I said, we were in our ridings for 2 weeks, and if the members opposite here in the chamber were listening, they would have heard that it's become clear to many that the NDP are failing to meet the moment in this tariff crisis. It's a moment that threatens the livelihoods of many British Columbians. And these families I spoke of earlier have been struggling right now. But what have we seen so far from this government as part of this legislative session so far? What have we seen from this so-called man of action premier in this province? Well, we've had a meaningless motion on tariffs that was useless. We've had basically no consequential legislation in the session so far to speak of, besides the carbon tax bill we had to debate until the wee hours of the morning this week. We've had a budget that had nothing to do with tariffs besides using them as an excuse to cancel the $1,000 grocery rebate the election promised to British Columbians. And let's not forget the throne speech. Remember that nothing burger speech full of World War II rhetoric. They didn't outline any plan whatsoever for a legislative agenda, despite being in unprecedented times where British Columbians were looking for answers. And yes, we are indeed in unprecedented times. And look, Mr. Speaker, I'm a millennial. I'm used to unprecedented times. Every few years, we've seemed to have them in my adult life. We've had 9/11, we've had a global financial crisis, a global pandemic that the previous speaker spoke of at length. And now we're at the start of a trade war. In unprecedented times, British Columbians need and deserve a government that will meet the moment and stand up for them. Mr. Speaker, Bill 7 just doesn't cut it. And after 4 months since the election, we finally had a legislative session. And after 4 weeks of sitting, this bill was cynically introduced by the Premier and Attorney General before a 2-week break. And only after the government House Leader introduced a motion to have the House extend sitting hours. So how much more cynical can you get? How much more contempt for this legislature can you show? And we just saw more of that today as amendments were brought at the very last minute. And we had the Premier actually get up as the first speaker to this bill and didn't speak about the amendments whatsoever. That's disrespect for this House and all of the members in this House. I don't mind showing up late. I don't mind the extended sittings. I don't mind that we were up till 2 in the morning the other night doing the people's work. But now we're on these extended sitting hours during this session. Really, it was all about, all along, trying to ram Bill 7 down the throats of British Columbians. So did they think that they could really dampen the public discourse on this bill by introducing it before the break? Well, they clearly didn't. Believe me, it was good that the opposition was watching, and certainly the public discourse only increased in momentum over that time. And the real story is that the government has failed to meet the moment on tariffs. In an act of desperation, it was out of desperation that the Premier actually introduced Bill 7. It was introduced as an enabling act, disguised as tariff response legislation, but in reality, it was really, as an enabling act, an unprecedented power grab that would grant the Premier near unchecked power, control to rewrite laws without debate, oversight, or opposition into 2027. No other government in Canada has even remotely attempted what the Premier has tried to do. A government proud of its plan and its agenda should be able to defend it to the public, and instead this draconian Bill 7 legislation has no clear plan or rationale while trying to give the Premier unlimited power through the Henry VIII clause to amend any legislation or regulation at any level under provincial jurisdiction. But don't take my word for it. The Dean of the Legislative Press Gallery, Vaughn Palmer, said, and I quote, "In 41 years of covering BC governments, I've not seen a legislation as arbitrary and far-reaching this side of the Federal War Measures Act." We can't let the NDP Premier get away with unlimited power with no accountability. This isn't the way we do democracy in Canada. It was ironic that the Premier believed we should fight against Trump's tariffs by trying to be more like him. I guess he wanted to sign his own ridiculous executive orders for the photo ops. To quote Leonid Sirota and Mark Mancini from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, the government is trying to take for itself far-reaching powers that smack of the arbitrariness and authoritarianism that characterize the Trump administration. That administration is a threat to Canada, but in fighting that threat, we should not become which we abhor. It was an insult to the work you do in that chair, Mr. Speaker, the work to oversee this important place where the people's business gets done. It was an insult to each and every member of this entire chamber. Thank goodness the opposition was watching and immediately called this out. Thank goodness the press gallery was watching and immediately called this out. And thank you to the many organizations that voiced their opposition, like the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, the ICBA, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the BC Chamber, and legal societies like the Canadian Constitution Foundation and Charter Advocates Canada. And I'd like to think that some of the backbench MLAs seated opposite played a role quietly to challenge the Premier on this bill. At least I hope they did for their constituents' sake. I'm sure some of the members opposite took particular note of comments from former NDP Attorney General and a former Premier, Ujjal Dosanjh, and I quote, "This is a fundamental, brutal assault on our Constitution, on our way of governing ourselves, and is not warranted by anything I can imagine." What an indictment of this Premier's bill. Mr. Dosanjh would never do this. Neither would John Horgan. Neither would Christy Clark. Neither would Gordon Campbell. Certainly not Bill Bennett or Dave Barrett or W.A.C. Bennett or any other Premier. Only this Premier would attempt something like this because it's how he operated all along. Like his brutal power grab to gain control of the NDP in the first place. like how he manipulated cabinet rivals to make it seem like he had more support than he actually did. Autocratic tendencies are the default rather than a feature with this premier. So now we've collectively forced him to walk back on Section 4, we hope. But he claims he will attempt to retool this and bring it back. So we'll be watching for that, obviously, and we hope that these amendments do indeed come forward. So British Columbians do deserve better than that. They deserve better than a premier who decided he needed a dictatorship to deal with tariffs. And really, we need to continue to move forward with actual debate for the people and doing the people's business here in this House as it should be. The opposition stands on the side of British Columbians, and we will never let British Columbia be subjected to the Premier's dictatorship. We will protect the rights of British Columbians day in and day out. So in the meantime, we also have the remaining sections of this bill to discuss. So here in the Economic Stabilization and Tariff Response Act, we do need to respond forcefully to tariffs. And I've said it before in this House, but will reiterate because it's important. I fully disagree with President Trump and believe he's making a serious mistake with tariffs. The last time a serious tariff war happened was legislation debated and passed over 1929 and 1930 in the United States that precipitated a major trade war. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act extended the Great Depression for years and was a complete and an utter disaster. And so where are we at now? Today was another stressful day for many Canadians. The U.S. now has tariffs on our aluminum sector impacting Rio Tinto and Kitimat. Canada's auto sector is severely targeted. And now more tariffs announced today for not just Canada, but other countries impacted by President Trump's terrible decision-making on this as well. This is bad for British Columbians, but we've got to remember that this is also going to be making Americans poorer. We need to actually remind Americans of that. We need to be using our relationships with border states like Washington and all of the great Pacific partnerships that we have down the West Coast and many states that we have relationships with. We need to remind them to really speak out and understand what tariffs are, because I don't think a lot of people actually know the mechanism of tariffs and how they will impact people. I'll point out that where I represent in Prince George Mackenzie, Northern BC is hurt to a greater extent by tariffs. We rely on an export-driven economy. And the U.S. market is still absolutely critical for our forest products, and pressures have existed already in that sector for years now, since we haven't had a softwood agreement since 2015. The industry has had to manage countervailing duties, and now we're adding another layer of uncertainty for the forest sector. We should be showing leadership within Canada to get things done, Mr. Speaker, and that's what British Columbians expect us to do in this House. We should show leadership for our resource sectors, for our small businesses, and we should actually be focused on making life more affordable for British Columbian families. The public wants us to do that work for them. The government's bill, will it actually help forestry? Will it help exporters in this province? Will it help small businesses who will be struggling to make ends meet in this tariff war? But more importantly, will it help the hardworking families when there's too much month at the end of their paychecks? So let's look at some of the sections, and I'm going to speak to part one first about interprovincial trade barriers. And this is legitimately, it's been spoken about in this debate already, this is legitimately the consequential part of this bill, and it should be the focus, because as legislators, we need to get this right. I'm fully in support of making it easier to trade within Canada. We're a country that is bound by confederations, so why is it that trade and labor mobility is so complicated between provinces? There was a federal, provincial, territorial committee on internal trade struck in 2017, and as far as I can tell, the government hasn't moved that file forward to any extent. And really, we could actually be leading at that table and dealing with a history of red tape and barriers that make it difficult to not only work in other jurisdictions for skilled workers in this province, but also for the goods and services passed between borders. We could be doing much better, and that's where some of that work could have been done in earnest. So, while BC's Premier tries to use tariffs as an excuse for an autocratic and ideological power grab with Bill 7, there are provinces in Canada who are actually leading on a better path forward. And it's already been spoken about in this debate, but Nova Scotia has committed to reducing internal trade and labour mobility barriers through dedicated internal trade legislation, not burying it in a poison bill. It's actually using it as dedicated internal trade legislation. And so I do think British Columbia should follow Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston's lead on this. It's showing leadership within Canada, and we're seeing other provinces now take that up. New Brunswick has. I know Ontario is working towards that as well, and British Columbia should be really leading on that spirit of reciprocity, because that is really what Nova Scotia's bill is based on. And it's a long-term solution as well. This shouldn't just be for this crisis. This should actually be make this internal trade barriers removal permanent in this country. I think that would be good for Canada as a whole. As I said, Nova Scotia's bill is all about reciprocity and making that permanent. So let's get that done. The Nova Scotia's Act is called an Act Respecting Free Trade and Mobility Within Canada. And I quote, just so into the record, we see the purpose of the Act is to remove all barriers to trade in goods, services, and investment between the provinces and territories of Canada. Period. Let's make that the focus of this bill that we're talking about. The NDP's bill just doesn't do that. For one, the trade provisions sunset with the bill in 2027. There's a real problem with that. Why aren't they making these provisions permanent? Next, the NDP's version is too subject to political manipulation by the NDP. I think there are things that could be really strengthened, but it's very arbitrary in nature. I think Nova Scotia's bill is much more transparent. And lastly, the bill explicitly states that the Labour Mobility Act will be exempt. And this, to me, as the labour critic for our caucus, also makes no sense. We need more healthcare workers. We need more tradespeople in BC. So we're completely missing the mark on this, Mr. Speaker, and I think it can be done much better. There is another option, obviously, for this entire portion of the bill, and you'll recall, Mr. Speaker, it's been spoken about in the debate so far, that the Leader of the Opposition introduced Private Member's Bill M203, Free Trade and Mobility Within Canada Act. That bill was modeled, of course, off of Nova Scotia's bill, and true Team Canada would be actually aligning with the other provinces that I've already mentioned. Not the NDP's performative approach while they implement a political and ideological agenda in this bill. So the government has some options here. They could scrap Bill 7 entirely and call the member from Nechako Lake's bill. Or, if the government prefers, replace the entire part of interprovincial trade with the language from the member from Nechako Lakes, the Leader of the Opposition, what he proposed. That would strengthen this bill, certainly. The language in it, it would make it transparent, and it would help British Columbians. This is a part of the bill that we absolutely have to get right. We can't afford to have political manipulation from a government that we've seen can't help themselves. We've seen them do that before on, for example, community benefits agreements on public construction projects. So where they exclude a majority of contractors and their workers from public projects with political manipulation, excluding the vast majority of workers from these projects, and thereby also making projects more expensive for taxpayers. And I'll add that they've done that by forcing only American headquartered unions on these public projects. So that's, in the course of this debate, there's actually an interest there. So we have to get this part of the bill right. There's a new C.D. Howe report released today, yesterday rather, Mr. Speaker. It's called Eyes on the Prize, a game plan to speed up removal of internal trade barriers in Canada. And I want to just read a portion from this new report because it's brand new. It says, removing all, and I quote, removing all obstacles to trade between provinces and territories that might be susceptible to policy intervention could increase the Canadian GDP by up to $200 billion annually, a 7.9% boost. The impact would be far-reaching, helping on a range of downstream issues that Canadians care about, like housing affordability, healthcare worker shortages, supply chain resilience, real wage growth, consumer choice, productivity, and industrial competitiveness. Those are all goals that we should be focused on in this bill, Mr. Speaker. So that's why it's so important for us to get this part of the bill right. So there was a fair bit on part 2 that was referenced from the previous speaker as well. So just on part 2, I'm going to quote the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, who had really a near perfect critique of this part of the bill. So, and I quote the CFIB, Part 2 allows the Cabinet to issue arbitrary procurement directives while shielding officials from liability. This has the potential for the province to repeat the mistakes it made with community benefit agreements, which increase costs and delays for public projects. Again, what I just spoke of, and the business community is already saying the same things, Mr. Speaker. This government can't be trusted with an arbitrary procurement directive. We've seen how they've manipulated procurement to reward friends and insiders, while taxpayers are actually hosed. Community benefits agreements have given us less projects for more money while shutting out, as I said, the vast majority of workers. We can't let that be a feature of procurement in this province. Now, I'll move on and talk about part 3 of the bill regarding tolls, fees, and charges. And again, I'm very concerned with the government's choices. I think this needs some work here. And these are definitely choices that the government has made with this section. I'm hoping to see a little bit more in the amendments, but I think we need to really focus on this section. Again, the government leaves a lot of room for political manipulation with zero guardrails. They're trying to target U.S. citizens and truckers with this tolls, fees, and charges section. But in doing so, the government is creating some real problems. So first of all, there's nothing in here that will prevent tolls from being charged on British Columbians. I'm concerned about that. It's very arbitrary. There needs to be guardrails that are built into this. And perhaps even more alarming, though, members, I want to draw all of your attention to Section 17 on the collection and disclosure of personal information. The critic for Attorney General talked about this at length as well. The government is wanting to create some sort of a big brother state with this. Very, very concerning. So it actually suggests that the government could conceivably collect information on every single license plate, what highway they're traveling on, store that information, and use it in road pricing, tolls, and who knows what else, Mr. Speaker. How is it that the individual who supposedly led the BC Civil Liberties Association is the one introducing really challenging legislation like that, a part of the bill that really is an affront to people's personal information and their civil liberties? Overarching for these various parts of the bill, it's really the continued arbitrary nature, and they have continued that pattern throughout the bill of kind of autocratic language that's also included in Part 4 that I've already mentioned off the top. So really, as summing up our parts 2 and 3 of the bill, let's hear from the Business Council of BC on parts 2 and 3, and I quote, "These broad powers raised concerns about transparency, oversight, and the potential for unintended financial impacts on businesses, workers, and consumers. So this is an important part of the bill as well, and I'm not the only one saying this. This is the Business Council of BC representing the largest employers in the entire province. We've also heard from the CFIB, who are representing small businesses. They represent the vast majority of workers in this province. It's critical that we get these sections right, and I want to see that in this bill, and I'm not currently seeing it. We need to make sure that we are making sure it's accountable. This is an economic war, not a physical one, and the government should be paying attention to the businesses that employ British Columbians when they craft their legislation. But really, as we've seen, a lack of consultation is the norm with this government. As we recently discovered in the course of Bill 4 debate as well, the NDP failed to even consult businesses on consumer protection legislation. And we had concerns, and we support consumer protection, and I think it was important. But as the finance critic put in a hoist motion, we wanted to have that consultation that wasn't done properly to go back to the business community, and the NDP voted against that. So we've seen time and time again that even when they attempt to consult, it's not been a straightforward or a good process. British Columbians remember the Land Act last year, Mr. Speaker. I can also remember successive labor code reviews where employers were actually not looked at. They had submissions, but we know that despite the report actually saying that some of the government's proposals would be negative to employers, the government chose to ignore all of that. The consultation, Mr. Speaker, hasn't been done well, and it's been a sham. So here we are today with a tariff threat in front of us, and Bill 7 doesn't meet the moment that British Columbians expect of the People's House here in British Columbia. So let's rescind this bill. Let's get it right, Mr. Speaker. And I'm asking the members opposite to listen to their constituents. Push back on a power-hungry premier, and let's do our jobs as legislators and get this bill right. I think that this is an opportunity to strengthen our economy here at home by fixing internal trade once and for all. We can actually have this not just, internal trade to 2027. Let's make this permanent in Canada with a true Team Canada approach, modeled off of great leadership that Tim Houston in Nova Scotia actually showed us. That premier has shown leadership within Canada. Let's get our resource sectors working again. And in my riding, and Prince George Mackenzie, a very resource-focused jurisdiction. We've got forestry, mining, oil and gas, you name it, agriculture. These sectors were already struggling. And now they're going to be struggling even more with tariffs. These are export-driven sectors, Mr. Speaker. We need to get this bill right to support those sectors, because they represent families who need us. So let's make sure that workers have the opportunities for good-paying jobs to provide for their families, Mr. Speaker, and we can't do that if we don't get this bill right, if we don't get the competitiveness conditions in this province right. We've just seen today another 2 credit downgrades in this province. All of that is actually hurting the macroeconomic situation in this province. And we need to get these conditions right, Mr. Speaker. I stand with the rest of the opposition to oppose tariffs. We need to fight back. We need to be strong in voicing our opposition, and retaliatory but strategic in how we do it, Mr. Speaker. And I also stand in opposition to the NDP's approach to running this province. Having 2 credit rating downgrades today, we've already had 2 others previous to that. That's not leadership. That's actually putting our economic future at risk when most of our financial future is off to paying debt. So, Mr. Speaker, in wrapping up, I'm standing opposed to Bill 7, and I thank you for the time today.